My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 31 years old. On the night of my engagement party, I walked into my parents' house expecting champagne, laughter, and maybe for the first time in my life, a moment where everything felt right. Instead, I found 150 people sitting in silence, facing me like a panel of judges, their expressions unreadable, their eyes sharp and waiting, as if I had already done something wrong, and they were simply waiting for me to realize it. My mother didn't hug me. She didn't even say hello. She walked straight past me, reached for the engagement photo framed on the wall behind me, and without a word, took it down. My father stood up slowly, holding a folder thick enough to mean something serious, something prepared, something planned. And when he opened his mouth, his voice didn't carry warmth or pride or even anger. It carried calculation. "Before we celebrate anything," he said, his tone measured and cold, "there's something we need to settle." That was the moment I understood. This was never a party. This was a setup. And 4 days later, when they were calling me nonstop, begging, demanding, panicking, I didn't answer. And here's why. Before I tell you what happened next, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I always read them. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in the Bennett family meant understanding very early that love was not something freely given. It was something earned, measured, compared. And most importantly, it was something I was always just slightly falling short of. There were 2 kinds of daughters in my family. My younger sister Emily and me. Emily was effortless, beautiful without trying, charming without thinking, the kind of person who could walk into a room and have everyone smiling within minutes, while I was the one who stood quietly in the corner, rehearsing what to say, and still getting it wrong. My father, Thomas Bennett, built his law firm from nothing. The kind of man who believed that everything in life had a price and everything valuable had to be justified. My mother, Linda, had once been an artist, but somewhere along the way, she traded creativity for perfection. And perfection, in her eyes, always looked like Emily. I remember the day I graduated with honors in architecture. I stood on that stage, holding my diploma, scanning the crowd, searching for their faces, hoping just this once they'd be looking at me the way they looked at her. They weren't. Emily had a photo shoot that day. More important, my mother told me later, not even pretending to hide it. When I got my first job at a respected firm, my father nodded once and said, "That's a start." When Emily dropped out of university 2 years later, he told everyone she was finding herself. It didn't matter that I was working 12-hour days, building something real, something stable. In their eyes, Emily had potential. I had responsibility. And those were not the same thing. But there was one person who never made me feel like I had to compete. One person who saw me exactly as I was and never once asked me to be more or less than that. My grandfather, Arthur Bennett. He used to sit with me for hours, listening to my ideas, my sketches, my plans, as if they mattered, as if I mattered. And when I doubted myself, he would always say the same thing. "Claire, the world will try to tell you who you are. Don't let it." 3 years ago, he got sick. And everything changed. 3 years ago, my grandfather was diagnosed with a degenerative illness that slowly stripped him of his independence, piece by piece, until the man who once fixed everything with his hands struggled to hold a glass of water without it shaking. And the family, the same family that had always praised loyalty and unity, suddenly became very busy. My father talked about hiring private care. My mother suggested a facility, somewhere quiet, somewhere appropriate. Emily said it would be too emotionally draining for her to be involved. And I didn't think twice. I moved into his house within the week. I told myself it was temporary at first, just until things stabilized, just until someone else stepped in, just until the family figured something out, but weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, and somehow I became the only constant in his life. I learned his medication schedule better than my own routine. I learned how to read the small changes in his voice, the subtle signs of pain he tried to hide, the quiet moments when he needed company but didn't want to ask for it. Emily visited twice in those 3 years. My parents came on holidays, stayed just long enough to feel like they had fulfilled some invisible obligation, and always left with something more important waiting for them somewhere else. But my grandfather never complained. Not once. Instead, he told me stories about his life, his regrets, the choices he would have made differently if he had understood sooner what truly mattered. And sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and the world felt smaller, he would look at me with a kind of clarity that made everything else fade away. "You stayed," he told me once, his voice soft but certain. "I didn't have anywhere else to be," I answered. He shook his head slightly. "No, Claire, you had everywhere else to be. You just chose not to go." He passed away 6 months ago. Quietly, peacefully, with my hand in his. At the funeral, my mother hugged Emily tightly, whispering something that made her cry, and when she turned to me, her expression shifted into something polite, distant, almost formal. "You did what you could," she said, as if I had completed a task, as if 3 years could be reduced to that. I didn't respond, because something in me had already started to change. The first sign that something wasn't right came exactly 1 week before my engagement party. I was at work, reviewing a project deadline, when my phone lit up with my father's name, and for a moment I just stared at it, because he rarely called me directly unless something needed to be discussed, evaluated, or corrected. "Claire," he said when I answered, his tone unusually neutral, "have you received any correspondence regarding your grandfather's estate?" I leaned back in my chair, frowning. "No, should I have?" A pause, brief, measured. "Just checking," he said. "We're organizing some things. There will be a family discussion soon." Before I could ask anything else, the call ended. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it, the way he asked, the way he didn't explain. And then, 2 days later, Emily called me, which almost never happened. "Claire," she said, her voice unusually warm, almost rehearsed, "we're planning something special for you and Daniel." My grip tightened slightly on the phone. "Special?" "Your engagement," she said quickly. "We want to celebrate properly. The whole family, everyone. In 31 years, my family had never thrown me a party. Not once. And now suddenly, this? It's about time we came together," she added, softer now. "Don't you think?" Something in her tone felt off. Too careful. Too intentional. But a small part of me, the part that still remembered what it felt like to hope, wanted to believe it. "Okay," I said slowly. "Okay," she repeated, relief slipping through her voice just for a second. "Saturday. Don't be late." The next warning came from someone I didn't expect. My cousin Rachel. She cornered me after the rehearsal dinner, her expression tense, her eyes darting around like she was afraid someone might hear us. "Claire," she said under her breath, "have you talked to your parents about the will?" My stomach tightened instantly. "What will?" Her face went pale. "You don't know?" "Know what?" She hesitated, clearly debating whether she should say anything at all, and then finally leaned closer. "They think you're going to take everything." The words didn't make sense at first. "Take what?" "Grandpa's house," she whispered. "The accounts. Everything. Your dad's been saying you manipulated him, that you stayed there for a reason." The air felt heavier suddenly, harder to breathe. "That's not true," I said quietly. "I know," she said quickly. "But they don't, or maybe they don't want to." A cold realization started to form, slow and sharp. "Rachel," I said carefully, "what exactly is happening on Saturday?" She shook her head. "I don't know everything, but it's not just a party." That night I checked my mailbox for the first time in days, and that's when I saw it. A single envelope. Thick paper. Formal. Addressed only to me. From a law office. My hands felt cold as I opened it right there on the front steps, reading under the dim porch light, my heartbeat loud in my ears. "Dear Miss Bennett, we request your presence to discuss matters regarding the estate of Arthur Bennett. Only me. Not the family. Not the Bennetts. Just me." I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. And in that moment, standing alone in the quiet, something inside me shifted completely. Whatever was waiting for me on Saturday, it wasn't going to be what they thought. By the time Saturday evening arrived, I already knew one thing for certain. Whatever was waiting for me inside that house, it wasn't a celebration. It was a confrontation. The driveway was packed when Daniel and I pulled up, cars lining both sides of the street in a way that felt excessive for an engagement party, almost staged, almost deliberate. And as I stepped out, smoothing down my dress, I felt that same quiet tension settle into my chest, The kind that doesn't scream danger, but whispers it just loudly enough that you can't ignore it. "Are you sure you're okay?" Daniel asked softly, his hand brushing against mine. I nodded. "I need to see this." The front door was already open, and the moment I stepped inside, everything stopped. There were no decorations, no music, no laughter, just rows of chairs, dozens of them, filled. Facing the center of the room like an audience waiting for a performance that hadn't started yet. And then, just like before, every single head turned toward me. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. My mother stood near the far wall. My father sat at a long table. Emily was beside him, waiting. Of course they were waiting. "Claire," my father said, his voice carrying across the room with "Thank you for joining us." I didn't move any closer. "What is this?" "A conversation," he replied. "No," I said calmly, my eyes scanning the room, taking in the familiar faces, the curious ones, the uncomfortable ones, the ones already judging. "This isn't a conversation. This is a setup." A ripple moved through the crowd. My father smiled slightly. "Then let's not waste time pretending." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." I didn't. "Say what you need to say." For a moment, something flickered in his expression, irritation maybe, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by that same cold composure I had seen my entire life. He opened the folder in front of him. 3 years, he began. "You lived in your grandfather's house." I said nothing. "You isolated him. You controlled access. You positioned yourself as indispensable." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" he countered smoothly. "Because now, conveniently, you are the only one receiving communication from his legal representative." There it was. The real reason. The real accusation. "You think I manipulated him," I said quietly. "I think," he replied, leaning forward slightly, "that you understood exactly what you were doing." A murmur spread through the room. I could feel it building. The judgment. The assumption. The narrative they had already decided on. "And what exactly do you think I was doing?" I asked. "Securing your future," he said simply, "at the expense of your family." I let that sit for a moment. Let the weight of it settle. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. "I haven't opened this yet," I said, holding it up just enough for him to see. That got his attention. For the first time that night, his confidence shifted, just slightly. "But since we're all here," I continued, my voice steady, clear, "since this is apparently a public matter." I tore it open. Right there, in front of everyone. The sound echoed in the silence. I unfolded the document slowly, deliberately, my eyes scanning the words as I read them for the first time. And then I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because suddenly, everything made sense. "Would you like to read it out loud?" my father asked, his tone tightening. I looked up at him. "No," I said softly, "I don't think I need to." And then I placed the document flat on the table in front of him. "You should." The room held its breath. My father hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough, because everyone saw it. The hesitation, the doubt, the crack. He picked up the paper, adjusted it, started reading, and as his eyes moved across the page, the color drained from his face, slowly, visibly, completely. "What does it say?" someone asked from the back. He didn't answer. "Dad?" Emily's voice was sharp now. "What does it say?" His hand tightened around the paper, and when he finally spoke, his voice was no longer steady. "The house," he began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "The house has been left." He couldn't finish, so I did. To me, silence. But not the same silence as before. This one was different. This one was breaking. "It's not just the house," I continued, my voice calm, almost gentle now, because suddenly I wasn't fighting anymore. "It's everything tied to it. Legally. Completely. With no conditions that require me to share it." My mother shook her head slowly. "That's not possible." "It is," I said. Emily stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That doesn't make sense," she snapped. "Why would he do that?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. "Because I stayed." The words landed heavier than anything else that night. Because they were simple. Because they were true. "And there's one more thing," I added, turning my attention back to my father. He didn't look up. "Go on," he muttered. "There's a clause," I said, "about coercion." That made him freeze. "If any family member attempts to pressure, threaten, or publicly manipulate me into giving up my inheritance." I paused just long enough for the room to understand what was coming. They forfeit any claim to the remaining assets. Now the silence wasn't just heavy. It was suffocating. Because everyone understood. Every single person in that room had just witnessed exactly that. My father's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the paper. "You're lying," my mother whispered. "I'm not. You're twisting this. I'm not." Emily's voice cut through, sharp, desperate. "So that's it," she said. "You just take everything and walk away?" I looked at her for a long moment, then I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "That's what you did." And for the first time, no one spoke. No one defended them. No one supported the version of the story they had tried to build. Because the truth didn't need defending. It was already there, clear, undeniable. I stepped back from the table. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "Not today. Not ever. And I'm not going to stand here and let you rewrite what those 3 years meant." My father finally looked up at me, and whatever power he thought he had at the beginning of the night, it was gone. "You're making a mistake," he said. I almost smiled. "No," I replied softly. "I'm finally correcting one." I turned, took Daniel's hand, and walked toward the door. No one stopped me, not this time. And as I stepped outside into the cool night air, leaving that room, that silence, that version of my life behind me, I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel lost. I felt free. 3 months later, I stood in my grandfather's house, sunlight spilling through the windows exactly the way it used to when he sat in his chair by the corner, reading quietly, the air filled with that same calm presence that had always made this place feel different from anywhere else. I kept everything that mattered. His chair, his books, the small details no one else would notice. And slowly, piece by piece, I built something new around it. Not a replacement, not an escape. Something real. My phone had stopped ringing weeks ago. The messages had stopped too. No apologies, no explanations, just silence. And for the first time in my life, that silence didn't hurt. It protected me. I stepped out onto the porch that evening, watching the sky shift into soft shades of gold and blue, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice again. "You stayed." I smiled slightly. "Yeah," I whispered into the quiet. "I did." And finally, I understood something that had taken me 31 years to learn. Love that has to be earned isn't love. Family that only values you when it benefits them isn't family. And sometimes, walking away isn't losing everything. It's the first time you actually keep what matters. That's my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose yourself when no one else would, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. And tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I'd love to know. I'll see you in the next one.